Some people come into our lives with a smile on their face. They're friendly, compliment us, and seem trustworthy. Little by little, we get attached. We build a bond. But over time, we realize we're always the ones giving in, always listening, always helping, even when we need a break. And when it's our turn to need something, these people disappear, or they make us feel guilty for not being okay. The hardest part is they don't seem like bad people. They're polite, caring, but they expect too much. They ask too much. And without realizing it, they start draining our energy. We begin to wonder, am I the problem? Am I being selfish? Am I overreacting? But what if that's not it? What if what you're feeling is a clear sign that this relationship is wearing you down? This video is about that, about relationships that seem normal, but over time make us feel small, tired, even unsure of who we are. Let's talk about 5 types of people who, even without meaning to, end up draining our peace, our calm, our strength. And most importantly, let's learn how to spot the signs. Because taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's maturity, it's self-love. If this content resonated with you, click like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this too. And tell me in the comments, my kindness deserves respect. If that's how you feel, write it down. It helps more people wake up. Many of the behaviors we're about to look at don't come from malice. They come from personal histories, from distorted ways of dealing with emotions. And often, those who act this way have also been hurt and are simply repeating what they've learned without realizing it. But there comes a point when we have to make a choice. Keep hurting ourselves to keep others comfortable, or protect ourselves, even if that hurts a little at first. You who are here may have been through a lot. You've helped many people, carried your own burdens and theirs too. Maybe you've even gotten used to the idea that that's just the way it is, that it's not worth the fight, that better to swallow it than lose someone. But what happens when that starts to eat away at you from the inside? The stories you're about to hear aren't meant to point fingers. They're meant to open your eyes, and maybe open up a new space within you. A space for peace, for worthiness, because it's never too late to stop giving more than you can. It's never too late to realize that some relationships just aren't fair to you. Let's begin. Block 1. The taker. Gloria always seemed to be in crisis. Problems at work, family fights, rough days. Everything about her gave off a sense of urgency, a certain heaviness in her eyes, her words, her gestures. And around her, there was always someone trying to help. Not because she asked, but because she seemed to radiate a silent plea for rescue. It was like her fragility was a wordless cry for attention, and those nearby felt touched, responsible, as if they had no choice. At first, it made sense. Everyone goes through rough patches. Helping someone in pain is often an act of humanity, but over time, it became clear that the rough patches never ended. And that Gloria, even surrounded by people willing to support her, didn't seem to get better, only to demand more. She didn't ask directly, but every absence felt like abandonment. Every "I can't right now" was taken as coldness. And slowly, the people around her stopped looking after themselves, just to focus on her. Gloria created a kind of bond that seemed deep, but was one-sided. While she received attention, care, and someone to listen, she rarely offered the same in return. Not out of malice, but because in some way she believed she was always the one who needed more, and that's where the imbalance started to hurt. Because relationships like that don't break all at once. They wear down slowly, like a rope pulled too tight, starting to fray in silence. People who live with someone like Gloria end up exhausted, not from the affection, but from the constant feeling of being in debt, of always falling behind in taking care of themselves, of never having space for their own pain, because there's always a more urgent pain on the other side. That kind of presence demands a lot and gives very little. But because it comes disguised as fragility, It often goes unnoticed. The person playing the caregiver role doesn't always realize they're erasing themselves. It's common in these situations for people to wonder, if I stop helping, will I still matter? And that question carries an uncomfortable truth. In some relationships, your presence is only valued as long as there's effort. It's not always easy to see this clearly, especially when the bond is long-standing or comes from genuine affection. But there comes a point where we need to look more closely. How much has care turned into a burden? Stories like Gloria's happen all the time, in old friendships, family ties, romantic partnerships. They're bonds that feel like affection but in practice demand more than they give. And when help turns into duty, care becomes exhaustion and attention becomes a burden. Maybe it's time to rethink things. You can't always change the other person, but you can, little by little, change the role you play in that dynamic. Sometimes it starts with a simple act, waiting for someone to ask how you are before you jump in to fix one more pain. Caring for someone should never come at the cost of your own balance, and those who truly care about your presence will also know how to respect your boundaries. Block 2. The blamer. Margaret was one of those people who knew how to make her presence felt. She was always ready to help. She gave advice, lent a hand, made a point of showing she cared. And no one doubted her kindness, at least in the beginning. She showed she cared. But behind the attention, there was something hard to name. Every act of help came with a certain weight, a reminder, a subtle expectation. Margaret didn't ask for anything in return, but she also didn't forget what she had done. And over time, she began to repeat, gently but firmly, "After everything I've done for you, I just wanted you to consider me a little more. If it were the other way around, I would have done it differently." She wasn't aggressive. She was just hurt, always a little hurt. And that hurt, even when unspoken, made everyone around her move with constant caution. It felt like walking a tightrope. Any truly honest choice, taking time for yourself, making a decision she didn't expect, could bring out that bitter silence, those words laced with disappointment. It was hard to see that deep down, Margaret used guilt as a bond. She didn't yell, but she waited. She didn't accuse, but she got hurt and made sure everyone knew it. And that's how, in many relationships, the fear of disappointing starts to take root. Not out of cruelty, but because, little by little, you start living just to avoid hurting the other person, even if it costs you. Over time, small decisions turn into dilemmas. You stop speaking, stop choosing, stop going, just to avoid that disappointed expression, the "it's fine" that clearly isn't. And all of that builds up inside your chest, a pile of small sacrifices. Many people spend years in bonds like these, where affection blurs into obligation and love slowly turns into emotional surveillance. It's not ungrateful to take care of yourself. It's not selfish to take a step back when the emotional weight is more than the bond can hold. Sometimes the silence of someone who feels hurt isn't a sign of love. It's a form of control. And recognizing that doesn't mean pushing people away. It just means learning that healthy relationships don't keep score with reminders. They give through presence. If there's going to be affection, let it be light. If we're going to be together, let it be wholehearted, not out of obligation. Block 3. The invisible one. Raymond was never the kind of person to cause problems. He was always in a good mood, said the right things, and knew how to be charming when he showed up. But that was exactly the point. He only showed up once in a while. There was no consistency, no stability. There were emotional visits, quick, strategic, almost calculated. He appeared when he needed something, advice, help, a bit of comfort. And while he talked about himself, he seemed close, almost intimate, but as soon as he got what he came for, he vanished again. He wouldn't reply to messages for days. Forgot dates, left conversations hanging, never really showed genuine interest in others, not out of cruelty, but simply because he wasn't truly involved. It was as if the bond always had a limit for him, a limit you didn't choose. On the outside, Raymond was polite and pleasant, but inside something was always missing. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. His presence slipped away, even when it felt like he was there. This kind of relationship is common and painful. It doesn't hurt you in obvious ways, it just wears you down, because it demands steady presence from one side and gives back almost nothing. People involved with someone like this often take a long time to realize what's happening. There are no fights, no arguments. The absence is gentle, almost invisible, but it leaves a mark. And over time, that mark turns into doubt. Doubt about your own worth, about the place you hold in the other person's life, about whether the affection was real or just convenience. And that's when the effort begins, messages trying to keep the bond alive, gestures of care that aren't returned, expectations that turn into disappointment. Little by little, you start to notice a subtle imbalance. You give, the other shows up, you wait, the other goes silent. There's no breakup, but there's no real connection either. Raymond wasn't cruel, but maybe he never learned how to stay. And those who tried to keep the relationship burning slowly faded themselves. Not every absence is rooted in malice, but it's not affection either. We have to learn to see what remains when no one needs anything, because true affection doesn't depend on need. It shows itself in presence without reason. If you've been giving too much in relationships that give you little in return, maybe it's time to ask, who really stays, even when there's nothing to ask for? Presence is a choice. And you deserve people who choose to stay, even when they don't need anything from you. Block 4. The envious one. Camilla was always around. At celebrations, in morning group chats, at the most important events of the week. She had the warmth of someone you've known for a long time, and she always spoke politely, always in the right tone. She seemed attentive, caring, involved, and for a long time that image was enough. But there were moments when something slipped through her gaze. A certain discomfort disguised as a compliment, a long pause after good news, a word that seemed supportive, but always arrived just a bit too late. On the day that promotion came, or when a long-time dream finally came true, Camilla smiled. She said she was happy, hugged tightly, and repeated how well-deserved it was. But around the gesture, there was a heavy silence, like someone watching something they're not sure whether to applaud or swallow hard. Over time, the signs repeated. Ambiguous phrases, subtle comparisons, advice that felt more like holding back than encouragement. Things like, "These days it's easier, right? You always had a star, different from most." Or, "Hopefully it really works out. Sometimes it just seems too good to last." Small phrases, small gestures, nothing offensive, but never truly light. Little by little, the excitement started to be withheld. Plans were kept quiet. And the relationship went on, but more restrained, like someone avoiding turning on a bright light in a room where someone always prefers the dimness. Some relationships work like this. The presence remains, but the emotional connection weakens. Not because of physical distance, but because of a difference in soul. There are people who know how to hold your pain, but not how to share in your joy, who offer support when you fall, but can't stay when you rise. And over time, the emotional space shrinks, even with constant physical presence. Camilla was never aggressive, but there was something in the way she positioned herself that kept others from fully blooming around her. Not out of cruelty, but because she struggled to handle someone else's light when it cast uncomfortable reflections inside her. There are affections that quietly grow toxic, not from a lack of declared love, but from an excess of unresolved comparison. Some distances don't need to be created. Life, over time, reveals them on its own. And when joy starts being managed, like it's too dangerous to share, maybe the affection has turned into something else. Maybe it's become overprotection or disguised envy. Because those who truly root for you don't compete, they celebrate. Not all pain comes from harsh words. Some arrive softly. They come disguised as friendship, as care, as routine. And only after a long time do we realize that what hurt wasn't the gesture itself, but the imbalance it carried. Relationships like this don't break with shouting. They unravel slowly when awareness sets in. When you realize that caring too much, listening too much, waiting too much, without return, without exchange, without peace, comes at too high a cost for the heart. Looking at these stories isn't an act of blame. It's an act of clarity, and maybe of freedom. Because recognizing what hurts is the first step to stop accepting what wears you down, even when the other insists it's care, even when it's called love. Maybe among all these stories, one felt familiar to someone watching right now. Maybe more than one. And if that happened, there's something important in it. It wasn't by accident. Awareness is a quiet turning point. It's when something inside starts to realign. Not to cut people off, not to break everything, but to start protecting yourself with more strength, more calm, more truth. And sometimes it all starts with one small gesture, a comment, a number, a simple word like enough. If any of these stories touch something inside you, write it in the comments. It can be a number, a memory, or just a "I get it." Someone might see themselves in your words and find strength where they didn't know to look. And if this kind of content resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll keep this conversation going here, with time, with calm, with care. Always with respect for your story and for what you still want to transform.